Welcome to session 2 of From BC to ESV, How We Got the English Bible. To start us off, let me pray. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here today on a beautiful sunny Sunday morning to learn more about you and your word. And I just ask that you bless this group and that this be useful in helping us to grow a little bit more towards being proactive as apologists, that when we interact with friends, neighbors, coworkers, we'll know a little bit more about how the Bible came to be, and maybe we'll be able to share that. So I just ask that in your name. Amen. Okay. To start off with, I have show and tell. So this is called the Jesus Book. This is, the New Testament in Hawaiian Creole, also known as Pidgin. So I was just going to read just a little snippet here. And I think you'll catch on right away as to what this is. The sheep farmers and the angel messenger guys. That night, over there inside the fields, get sheep farmers taking care of the sheep. Right then and there, one angel messenger guy from the boss up there inside the sky come by them. All around them one awesome light when shine from the boss. And they when come real scared. But the angel guy say, no scared. I come for tell you guys good stuff from God that gonna make you guys and all the people stay good inside. This day inside King David's town, one boy when born that gonna take you guys out of the bad kine stuff you stay doing. He the Christ guy, the special guy God when sent. He the boss. This how you gonna know him. You gonna find one baby that stay wrapped up inside plenty cloths, lying down inside one thing for hold the cow's food. Okay, so this is the Pidgin Bible, or the Korean, Hawaiian Creole Bible. And obviously it's a paraphrase. So remember that a paraphrase is something that does not translate the Bible from the original languages. So it uses some other version of the Bible and then creates a paraphrase like this. How do you react to this? Just curious. How do you react to something like this? Is it a good thing? It's funny, right? But
well, to us it's funny. But to, say, Hawaiians that use that language, it might be an easy read for them.
It might. Yeah, sure. And so there's two ways to look at this, I think. On the one side, you can say, it's useful to certain groups of people. It's certainly entertaining to us. On the other side, you can say, some of these take us too far. I mean, not only are they paraphrasing, but they're injecting things that were never in the Bible. So from that perspective, I'm not sure. So I think we have to think about things like this, and we'll see another. I'll bring in another couple of these. Pastor Hans mentioned the Cotton Patch Bible a couple weeks ago, I think, and I'm going to bring the Cotton Patch Bible in, and wow, that's really something. But I'll pass this one around. Okay, here's our brain teaser for the week. Which of the following are Indo-European languages? Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. Which are Indo-European languages? Remember the language tree? Latin and Greek, yes.
By the way, you were going to get us a copy of that.
The language tree.
Language tree, sorry.
I'll have my secretary over here take some notes. Yeah. Oh, yes, thank you. My secretary was also pointing out that If you didn't get the handouts from last week, they're here on this table, and you can get those. So what is Hebrew? What is Hebrew? It's a Semitic language, which means it's a completely, totally different type of language. Alien language, really. And we will see this here. I'm going to pursue this at some length. Knowledge of what language is most important in Bible translation? English, yeah, I think so. I would agree with that. Your target language. You have to be super good at your target language and then get good at the other languages that you want to translate into that target language. What's the philosophy of translation that tries to preserve the exact grammar, word order, tenses, and vocabulary of the original language? Is it formal equivalence, paraphrase, thought for thought, meaning driven? Alex?
None of the above.
Well, okay. Yeah, my answer to that was going to be formal equivalence, which tries to preserve the forms, the exact forms of the original languages. But paraphrases don't, thought for thought doesn't, and meaning driven doesn't. So there's different ways to refer to this. The other way to refer to the formal equivalence on one side, if you have that chart on it, completely the other side is functional equivalence. Functional equivalence tries to translate for meaning. They all have to translate for meaning, right? I think we said this last week. All translation is interpretation. There are no translations that are not interpreting the original languages. There is no one-for-one correspondence. And people often, I think, you run into people that, I just want to know what those words mean in the Bible. Well, it can't be done, really. Okay. Okay, so today's session I'm entitling In the Beginning. And I want to make a correction to something that I said last week. Somebody asked about the Apocrypha, and I said the Shepherd of Hermas. And that's not part of the Apocrypha. It's one of the early Christian patristic writings that people, or some of the early manuscripts, you'll find that in. So what is in the Apocrypha? Well, it's this stuff. The book of Baruch, the book of Bel and the Dragon, Ecclesiastes, or the Preacher, Esther, Judith, Manasseh. It's a different Song of Solomon, History of Susanna, the book of Tobit, and the book of Wisdom. And because of the way they arrange them, sometimes you'll see other titles there, but that's basically what we're talking about. So, what is this Apocrypha stuff? Do we have it in our Bibles? No, how come? Why not? Should we? Right, it doesn't meet the criteria for inspired scripture, which would be which? Well, let's talk about it a little bit more. So, the Bible canon, okay? No, not that kind of canon that goes bang. The canon means rule, measure, or list. And we have a canon of scriptures that we can consider to be inspired and inerrant. Now, how did it get that way? Well, canonical books were considered to be inspired scripture right from the get-go, within decades of being written down. And then those particular books of the Bible were referred to often and frequently by the early church fathers. And also, they were either written by the apostles or people that were strongly associated with, friends of, companions of the apostles. So this is a direct line from those folks. The inspired canon also conforms to basic tenets of the church that going back through the complete Bible, and if it said something outrageous, then it probably wasn't inspired. So not inspired stuff was written much later. It was didn't correspond. We can't trace an author. We don't know that it was, one of the apostles or their associates. So you're probably wondering why I have the word crud up there. It's because of this. It's Da Vinci crud, okay? Now, all right, so it's the Da Vinci Code, right? Really popular books. The Da Vinci Code proposed weird theories that were espoused by just the fringiest people. But the problem was that the author of the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown, in his preface to the book, he claimed this is all authoritative. This is all real, true, and so on. And I think a lot of people were very influenced by this. So what did he say? He claims that there were books out there that should have been in the canon, and that the canon was in flux right up till the time that the church suppressed all these hidden books. And I mean, I don't know if you've heard his weird theories that are in these books, but one of them is that Jesus was married and had children, and there's a big conspiracy that's been going on for 2,000 years to suppress all this. It's just cloud cuckoo land stuff. Okay? The canon was not in dispute. The canon was established very early, within decades of when the books were written. In the early 2nd century, they discovered something called it was discovered in the 18th century, written in the 2nd century, called the Muratorian Canon, which was a list of the canonical books except for Hebrews, James, and 3rd John. The church, and there's lots of letters going back and forth, agreed upon what was in the canon. So in the 4th century, there were a number of church councils, and they ratified what was in the canon. Now, really emphasize this. The church councils did not impose the canon. They simply acknowledged what was already there. This is an important point if you're talking to other people about the Bible, because they'll probably bring up this, wackadoodle Dan Brown stuff and say, well, there was this Gospel of Thomas and there was this Gospel of this, and they were just not true. And all the scholarship agrees with that, basically, except for, again, some really fringy people. Questions? I see sort of like stunned silence out there. Is this new to anybody, or yes? I'm looking for reactions. Mina.
Is this book, does it include the theory that Jesus went to the east? There's like a missing gap in the Bible.
Yeah, I'm not sure that is. I read the Da Vinci crud, but I didn't read any of his other books. He's written, a whole bunch of other books now that are bestsellers, and I don't know. There's all kinds of legends and theories that are out there. That's just pretty strange. How many people have seen the movie Chariots of Fire? Oh, most of you. Okay. So, in the middle there, they have this choir sing a song. It's called Jerusalem. The words were written by the English poet William Blake, and the song is by Herbert Perry, the music. And that song, there's an official national anthem of Great Britain, right? God Save the Queen. So if I started singing it, you would stand up and, God Save the Queen. Actually, if I started singing it, you'd probably leave. But there's an unofficial national anthem of England, which I think the English people like even better than God Save the Queen. And it's called Jerusalem. That song, again, words by the English poet Blake used a legend that comes out of probably the Middle Ages, that Jesus was the nephew of Joseph of Arimathea. Has anybody ever heard this one? No. And when Jesus was a young man, Joseph of Arimathea was a tin merchant, and he sailed up to England, and Jesus walked on England's pastures green. That's in the song. Because that's where the tin was. And Joseph of Arimathea brought the tin back to the Holy Land. There's lots of variations on that. So There's all kinds of these weird, legendary stuff floating around out there. And Dan Brown is just part of it. So, all right. Last time we left, we were looking at the Latin alphabet, and we had just translated the Lord's Prayer. If Latin is hard, well, Greek is a little harder. So we don't have the expression, it's all Greek to me for nothing. Let's take a look at this Greek alphabet. So that to me looks like the Latin alphabet is having hallucinations. You can see some letters that look familiar, the alpha, the beta, but then you get in like the gamma and the delta, and it's getting a little on the strange side, right? And yes, that is only the capital letters. So we might have a little bit of difficulty with Greek, but Greek is so important. So this is a map of southern Europe today. You can see Greece here. And today, Greece is just a little pipsqueak of a country that sits down here at the bottom of Europe like a barnacle. Okay? It's got a population of about 10 million people. That's the same population as the state of North Carolina. It's physically about as big as Alabama. It's really just not a whole lot to shout about. But 2,500 years ago, Greece was a little pipsqueak of a nation that sat down at the bottom of Europe like a barnacle. What was important was this: the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire included the countries that today would be Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Syria, Jordan. Going into Afghanistan over here eventually, and Pakistan and up into Afghanistan. It was enormous. It was powerful. It was sophisticated. It was rich. It had huge armies, and they estimate, I've seen estimates, that like 1/6 of the people that lived on Earth at the time lived within the Persian Empire. The only other empires on Earth at the time were China and India. So it's the only, really civilized. So Greece was just sitting there on the periphery of this big empire, and it was just a piddling little thing. But this bad boy came along. Alexander the Great, yeah. Alexander the Great. So who was he? How did this happen? In 490 BC, the Persians attacked the Greeks. They're not willing to let the Greeks be independent. And they met the Greeks at a battle called Marathon. And lo and behold, the Greeks beat the Persians, which nobody expected. I mean, it's almost miraculous. There are reasons for that. Greeks fought better. They were more motivated. They were defending their own land. They had better tactics, probably better weapons than the Persians. The Persians retreated, but they had a huge empire, so they marshaled another army, an incredibly large army, and they invaded Greece again in 480. And actually, let me go back one slide. Let's go back 2 slides. So the Persians invaded across here, and they got all the way down. They burned Athens, and the Athenians had to flee the city. They defeated the Spartans at a battle called Thermopylae, or the Hot Gates. But the Spartans took a lot of casualties, and the Persians got a lot of casualties from beating the Spartans. The Spartans were the meanest, baddest Greeks around. So the Greek cities were all little divided. They're always fighting with each other, but they were able to unite to defend themselves against the Persians. All right, so finally there was a big sea battle, the Battle of Salamis. And at that battle, the Greek fleet basically destroyed the Persian fleet, and the Persians had to retreat back into this area over here. So, why is this important? Well, about 150 years later, this fellow, whose father was named Philip of Macedonia, had conquered most of the Greek city-states and united them, and he attacked the Persian Empire, and he conquered it. And this guy was only in his 20s when he basically had conquered the entire civilized world there, outside of China and the Indian civilization. And then he died within just a few years. But there was this huge empire now that was Greek. And Alexander spread Greek throughout that empire, Greek language, Greek culture. He made it Greek. And this is super significant. Without that having happened, I don't see how Christianity would ever have spread. All right? There was another guy. This was the good boy, if Alexander was the bad boy. His name was Paul. Paul of Tarsus. What made Paul so important to the spread of Christianity? Missionary journeys, okay. What made him effective? Lenny, yes. Say it again. Passed as a Pharisee, okay. That's one of the qualifications. Good. There were several others. Yes. Which language? Greek. Why was Paul good at Greek? He was also a Roman citizen, yeah. When Pontius Pilate had Jesus in front of him, he could just arbitrarily and summarily have him executed. If he'd had Paul in front of him, he could not have done that. Paul would have been able to claim due process of Roman law, and actually he could appeal a capital punishment case to the emperor himself. He had rights, okay? Okay. You're doing well. You're on a roll. But there's a little hint I want to give you. It has to do with somebody said he could speak the language, but what language? Greek. Why? I mean, where is Tarsus? Does anybody know where Tarsus is? Say it again. Yeah, let's go back a couple slides. So Tarsus. So we think of Paul as being Jewish, right? Here's Israel and Judea, right? But Paul was born up here in Tarsus. Well, guess what? Tarsus was culturally a Greek city. So Paul grew up not only as a Jew, but as a Greek. He could think like a Greek. He could speak like a Greek. He could philosophize like a Greek. He could argue like a Greek. And so Mars Hill, he's talking to the Greek philosophers, and he can talk to them on an equal footing. Without Paul, you don't really have those kinds of guys out there. I mean, Peter, Peter, John, they're Hebrew and Jewish and probably not nearly as effective. Okay. Let's talk about this for a second. This is the word koine. Who knows what koine means? Common, good, yes. In Greek, that's exactly what the word means. So it's a Greek word that means common. Here's a mnemonic device. Mnemonic is also a Greek word. Mnemonic device for remembering this. Let's say that you're Canadian. I'm sorry, but yes, let's say you're Canadians. Yeah, and so you're walking along and you spot this coin on the ground. You pick it up. It's a Greek coin. And so what do you say? Coin, eh? Okay. My wife has had to bear with this for over 40 years. So koine. So koine is Greek, but it's a different kind of Greek. It's the rough and tumble Greek, the Greek of the ship's captain, the merchant, the craftsperson. It is not the kind of Greek that was spoken in, let's say, 5th century Athens by writers such as like the famous Greek classical writers, Aristophanes, Euripides, Sophocles, all those guys, was a classical Greek. So the Koine Greek is probably closer to what, if we analogize this, today's English to Shakespeare would be like Koine Greek to classical Greek. Now, why do we care? Why would that be important at all? Well, it's going to come up a little bit later. It's because of the importance of the King James Bible. Well, now, how do we get from the ancient Greeks to the King James Bible? Who wrote the King James Bible? It wasn't King James. There were 54 men, translators of the King James Bible. They were scholars and they were clerics. That is, they were all deans, bishops, archbishops, you name it. They were all clerical people, and they had all gone to like the Oxbridge schools, Cambridge, Oxford, and were quite bright, and they knew languages. Many of them knew Greek, but the Greek they knew was the classical Greek that was spoken in 5th century Athens and Corinth and places like that. They didn't know Koine Greek. So when we look at the King James Bible, there's an effect there. They really weren't that familiar with the New Testament is written in Koine Greek, not classical Greek. Koine Greek of the 1st century, not classical Greek of the 5th century. So that's why we care. All right. So Greek culture was spread throughout that region. The Greeks and the Jews are not equivalent cultures. They're quite different. So I'm showing you this Greek red figure wear amphora because it indicates a little bit about Greek culture. They emphasized human. They were humanists in a lot of ways. They had, as you can see up there, they were athletic. They had games, and they would compete in the nude, and the nude human figure was something that they put on a lot of their art or sculpture and so on and so forth. And so man was sort of the measure of all things. The Greeks developed what we call rational thought, philosophy, high levels of art, literature, so forth. And again, the emphasis was definitely on the human beings, and so forth. And they didn't get along with the Jews. Why didn't they get along with the Jews? Or the Jews didn't get along with them. They hated each other. Why? Why would they hate each other? Well, the Greeks had conquered Judea. At the time of Alexander the Great, they conquered Judea, and they established a kingdom there, and they persecuted the Jews. So the Jews didn't really care for the Greeks, and the Greeks probably didn't care much for the Jews. Well, having seen an example of Greek art, I would now like to show you a fine example of Jewish art from the time of Jesus. And there it is. Okay, but basically doesn't exist. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that is Exodus 24. I mean, you're not going to make any images. By the way, this prevails in Islamic art to some extent, even today. They don't put images there. Later on, some of the Jewish art started to have a few things that were images, but at the time of Jesus, Probably not. They didn't like any images at all. At one point, the Romans wanted to bring their Roman emblems, their eagles. They were going to put those up on the Temple Mount, and the Jews almost revolted against the Romans at that point in time. So that's all it took. All right. So if the Greek alphabet was a little odd, the Hebrew alphabet looks like it's on LSD. It's really crazy. Again, and this harks back. It's not an Indo-European language. It's a Semitic language. Hebrew language quirks. So Semitic language, it's related to Aramaic and Arabic. So examples. Peace in Hebrew is shalom. In Arabic, it's salam. So you can see how close those words are to each other. Hebrew is read right to left, and ancient Hebrew had no vowels. That would be really tough to do. I mean, we couldn't do that, could we? So I drove to the boulevard looking for the FBC building with my, Right, so we do that to an extent, don't we? Okay, Hebrew was considered a dead language until revived in the 19th century by Jews who were hoping to return to Israel. And when it was revived, nobody really knew how it sounded. So what they did is they took the literary Hebrew that still exists, the written Hebrew, and the liturgical, and they also looked at Aramaic and Yiddish, and that's how they reconstructed the sound of Hebrew. So the modern Hebrew that's spoken in Israel today is a total reconstruction. Never, ever has any other language done that. I mean, there's never been a language that's been reconstructed after, 1,000 years of not being spoken. So this is really unique. Hebrew is very concise and direct and lean. Doesn't have very many adjectives. Instead of saying very deep, Hebrew says deep, deep. Instead of saying two different stones, it becomes a stone and a stone. It's got very few words for abstract or philosophical concepts. So instead of saying sin becomes miss the mark, or trespass, or cross over. It emphasizes physical action and objects. Descendants becomes seed. Strength becomes arm. So that's a difference in the whole foundation of language between Hebrew and, let's say, Greek, Latin, or even in English.
That is agrarian base?
It is. Okay. Here's Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or shall want not. That's King James, basically, up there. But the Hebrew says it in 1, 2, 3, 4 words. The King James has 9 words. So Hebrew says in 4 words what King James says in 9 words. You see, it's a very spare language. So let's learn a little Hebrew. This is, so what's the Bible reference here? Deuteronomy 6:4. Good. So again, I think I mentioned this last week. Mentioned this last week. The Shema is so fundamental to anybody that's Orthodox Jewish. They will hear this from the time they're in the cradle until the time they die. They'll repeat it every day. So I thought it would be fun for us to do this. So you will repeat after me Yes, good. All right. So, Shema. All right. Shema Yisrael. Wow, sounds like synagogue today. Shema Yisrael Adonai. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Perfect. You guys are all ready for bar mitzvah. All right. Are there any other languages that are important in the translation of the Bible besides Greek, Hebrew, and we're going to talk about Latin and Aramaic? Yes, Aramaic is important. So we don't tend to think about this, but a lot of the early texts of the Bible, which is what we're going to go into here next, were written in other languages. And there's a lot of kind of obscure languages. One was called Syriac or Syriac, and that was widely spoken in the ancient Middle East before Islam. There's Coptic, which is just ancient Egyptian, and that was widely spoken. Armenian, Georgian, Ethiopic, Arabic before Islam, Sogdian, which was from Iran, Slavonic, and there are a bunch of others. And some of these are fairly important because they're very old manuscripts, which we're about to talk about. So we have to kind of take into account some pretty obscure stuff. All right, takeaways. Translation, it's not easy or obvious. It's hard. It's an art, not a science. It can never reproduce the exact words of the original texts. If we wish to really know what the Bible says exactly as we possibly can, we've got to learn Hebrew and Greek. However, the good news about the good news is that most modern translations, nevertheless, are really accurate and they've gotten better over time. Not much gets lost in translation. Why would that be? Why would they be getting better over time? Discovering more manuscripts, exactly. Archaeology of culture. Computerization, analyzation of language, textual analysis of languages, more different languages, but related biblical languages being discovered and analyzed and studied. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that make the biblical translations more accurate. It's been estimated that when we look at these manuscripts, there's a lot of textual variation between them, but the variation is very trivial. So, we believe that the inspired Word of God is in the original manuscripts or autographs, and we don't have any of those. But the textual variations, even though there's a lot of them, they're just really trivial. Sometimes it's like spelling with one letter is missing, or it's the difference between the scribe wrote who or whom. They don't make any doctrinal difference. Okay. Well, in the beginning, when was the Bible written? Approximately the Old Testament, 1400 to 400 years BC. And the New Testament from about 50 to 100 AD. So when was it first written down? Was it written down right away? Well, we don't know, really. We talked about oral transmission, how oral transmission can be highly accurate. So we have to keep that in mind. A lot of people will criticize the Bible based on the fact, well, maybe it was, the oral transmission of it garbled it and so on. No, I don't think so. The Jewish lifestyle and mindset was to ensure and enshrine the Word of God, and they were so scrupulous about it, it just doesn't make any sense logically that it would have been garbled as it was passed on. It's inspired and inherent, but that applies to the original, what we call the original manuscripts or autographs. Do we have any of those? No. No. How do we date manuscripts? How do we know how old these things are? Sure. Vellum. What's vellum? Sheepskin. Okay. Yeah. So what other things could biblical manuscripts be written on? Papyrus. What's papyrus? Yeah. Right. It's a reed that grows in Egypt really well, and you beat it into a pulp and you make a kind of a paper out of it. So papyrus is paper. I think we get the word paper from papyrus. Papyrus. Vellum is animal skin. So animal skin was used a lot. The other word that you'll hear is parchment. Parchment is animal skin. Vellum is usually reserved for the younger animals like the calf or the little baby makes really better skin. Those skins of the animals are amazing. It's amazing stuff. You can write on it, and it will last for almost forever. Paper, modern paper, is acidic. So modern paper from about 150 to 200 years ago is slowly destroying itself. There's a fire within it, chemical fire. So paper doesn't, and even papyrus doesn't last as long as vellum. So vellum or parchment manuscripts can last a huge long time. I was a graduate student at the University of Washington in the library science program, and I took a class on rare books. And so we went to the rare book room at the University of Washington. And the librarian there told us, I've always thought this was interesting, she told us she could hear the books. I said, what? You can hear the books? What do you mean? Well, so the books that are written, and they had books, went back 600-700 years, that were on animal skins, are sensitive to humidity. So as the humidity changes, the books would slightly open or close. You said you could hear them on the shelves. Wouldn't that be eerie? The books are moving. But you take one of those books and you open it up, and it looks, the print, the type, the writing on it, it's not going to be typed, but the writing on it can look better than a modern book that you open up. It's that good, the preservation of many of these. All right, that's a digression. We just went down a rabbit trail, but that's okay. Does anybody know what the oldest actual physical copy of any part of the Bible, and what it is? Say it again? That's the New Testament. But for the Old Testament, there's something that's much older. And we'll get to this. Good. You get a gold star. The Ryland Papyrus. The Ryland Papyrus P52. It's not B52, it's P52. We're about to get to that here, okay? So that's a gold star answer. All right. So nobody knows. Okay. So this is important, guys. I think it's important. You're out there with your friends, neighbors, or whoever, and they say, we know the Bibles, we don't have it. So this was a discovery made in 1979. It's called the Ketef Hinnom Scrolls. Ketef Hinnom Scrolls. So what are these? They're tiny silver scrolls about the size of your finger, just about like that. They were discovered at an archaeological site. It was a mortuary complex at a place called Ketef Hinnom, which is on the outskirts of Jerusalem. They contain the text of Numbers 6:24 through 26 in Hebrew, and they're the only biblical text that's been found that dates from the First Temple period, and they have been dated to the 7th century BC. The story of this is pretty interesting. There was an Israeli archaeologist working on this. He didn't intend to find these. And he was out there, and there was had been assigned helpers from a archaeological club. So he had a bunch of teenagers out there helping him. And one of these guys was kind of bugging him. So he said, "You go in and sweep out that tomb. We need that tomb to be swept out clean." And so the kid comes back and, pulling on the shirt, say, hey, look. And he says, "All right, what is it?" So apparently he had taken a hammer and pounded a little bit, like people are wont to do when they're in a tomb, right? And it broke, the floor broke, and there was stuff under there. So you look at this, he had a little jar, and the archaeologist immediately recognized this as being extremely old. And so they went back and they found thousands of things in this tomb. Apparently the roof had collapsed and sealed it off. All the other tombs had been looted, but not this one. So they found human remains, skeletal remains. They found pottery, they found jewelry, they found this tiny little scroll. And it took them about two or 3 years to figure out how to unwind it without destroying it. And when they unwound it, they found this. So from left to right, there is the original scroll. It was silver, beaten silver, very thin sheet of silver. And then you see somebody's reconstructed the this is ancient Hebrew script. And then there's the modern Hebrew script. And then there's what it says. So, may the Lord bless you and guard you. May the Lord make his face shed light upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his face unto you and give you peace. And this is important because it's hard evidence that there was biblical text in place prior to what? Say it again, Alex.
When they got hauled off to Babylon?
Yes, the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians came in 586 BC, and after they got back from the Babylonian captivity, there's a lot of scholarship, that's been speculating. Well, these biblical texts weren't written until they got back, and it was some scribes that wrote them. And so there's a lot of criticism, secular criticism, scholastic criticism, of when the Bible was actually written. This proves that the Bible was this proves that this particular passage dates from the 7th century, and so it's before the Babylonian captivity. And this is the absolute oldest existing text that we have. Well, what about the New Testament? New Testament, this is Papyrus P52, thought to be the oldest existing New Testament text. It's a fragment containing parts of John 18. This exists in the John Rylands University Library in Manchester, England. That's why it's called the Rylands Papyrus, or Papyrus P52. The P52 is just there because they designate all the manuscripts that they find. They give them a number. There's several different numbering systems, and we'll get to that. We're going to get a little bit more into that in just a minute. 7 lines from John 18, verses 31 to 33, and parts of 7 lines from verses 37 to 38. It was originally a page in a book because there's writing on both sides, right? So not a scroll, a book, bound book. So a book that's bound and bound with pages in it. There's a technical word for this. It's called a codex, C-O-D-E-X, codex. So this was originally a codex book. Plural of that is codices, and that's simply a manuscript that's been bound together rather than a scroll. Now, they do find scrolls too. So when was this found? Well, somebody purchased it on the antiquities market in 1920, but it wasn't really recognized for what it was until 1934. They think it dates to between 100 and 150 AD. When did John write, do we think? He wrote late. Yeah, Revelation probably around 90. So if this dates from 100 to 150, this is super close. And that's important because being close in time is an indication of accuracy, authenticity, and so forth. Closer in time, the better. Okay. Biblical manuscripts. There's between 5,000 and 6,000 known biblical manuscripts. We have far more biblical manuscripts than we do for the classical authors like Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, Tacitus, and all those other guys you can think of. Most of the manuscripts for those authors, yes.
Back to John 18. Do you know what it said? What verse it was?
It was John 18, 31 through 33 and 37 through 38. So for those authors, it's sometimes like Plato, I think, or I'm not sure which, I don't remember which one, but there's like 12 manuscripts, 9 manuscripts is all that authenticates these guys. And their manuscripts date from like 900 AD. Like 1,000 years after. No, actually, these Greek authors, let me think, they were writing in, like the 3rd, 4th century. 1,200 years, 1,300 years later, they have a manuscript. And nobody questions that Plato and Tacitus and Aristotle did what they did. But they question the Bible all the time, 5,000 to 6,000 manuscripts. And they're finding more all the time. So there's a list of these. It's called the Kurzgefasste Liste der griechischen Handschriften des Neuen Testaments. Now I want everybody to repeat that after me. Fortunately, it's known as the K-list. It's available online. There's a university in Germany, in Munster, that maintains this list. And everybody that finds biblical manuscripts sends them in there to be cataloged. And they catalog them, where they were found and how old they think they are and what they say. And so anybody can access this stuff.
Like the letter K list?
Yeah, just the letter K list, yeah. They're finding these all the time. Why? How could they possibly win? Where are they finding these? Let's see what time it is. Where are they finding these? How can they be finding these? Archaeological digs. That would be the logical answer. That's what you would expect to be. But no, we know that they do find them in archaeological digs. It's important. But they find them on the antiquities market. And then we know that the most famous and reputable archaeologist of all, Indiana Jones, says that most archaeology is done in the library. There you go. They find them in libraries. Well, that's weird, isn't it? Most of these manuscripts go unrecognized. They've been purchased, they've been put in a library, they didn't catalog them right, they didn't realize what they had. They're just sitting there. And scholars go through these libraries and they find them. I just was on a YouTube listening to a video by a very famous professor of New Testament who was involved in this, and he said they went to this library in Greece, and they went through all the things that they thought had to do with the New Testament, and they found within some of these books, they found like 6, 8 new biblical manuscripts that nobody knew about. They're finding them all the time. The earliest fragment of Mark, which dates to the 2nd century, 2nd century, I think that may be a point of confusion to people. So when is the 2nd century? Yeah, you would start with the year 100 and go through the year 199. That's the 2nd century. So when did John write? Maybe 90. So 2nd century is just not very long after the Apostle John wrote. And some of the others were probably written around 70, 60, 50 AD. So not that long after, and that's really important as far as evidence, witnessing, and so forth to people. The earliest fragment of Mark dates to the 2nd century. When was it discovered and published? In 2018. I'm not kidding. All right. So come to light all the time, cataloged in the Kurzgefasste Liste der griechischen Handschriften des Neuen Testaments. Yeah, okay. So let's look at 3 famous codices. Remember, a codex is a book, and a codices is plural for codex. Yeah, sure, Ian. Yeah.
Just to clarify the answer,
Yeah.
why would a 2nd century manuscript be so important? I mean, why to know the accuracy of it?
When you're,
Knowing that John wrote around 90 AD, let's say,
Mhm.
that's what they figure, and then you've got a 2nd century, just a little bit of time. How does that lend to the accuracy?
does anybody want to answer that question?
Well,
Alex?
less chance of transcribing, copying errors.
Yeah.
You're closer to the original.
Yes.
Less chance of the oral, if that was no kidding, the first one that was written, there'd been, it's a really short time, there hadn't been this oral Chinese telephone
Right.
thing going on.
Sure. So the people that are reading it would immediately know if, they thought there were any mistakes in there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is the answer is, I was going to say, eyewitness account.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So it's like evidence in a court of law. The closer it is to the source, the better evidence it is.
You'll bring this out later on, Matt, but there are geological locations as well. And so something found in Europe, something found in Africa, and suddenly they say, hey, look how close they are.
Right. Yes, exactly. So it just better authenticates, verifies. Yeah, sure.
I'm sure you've read The Case of Christ, right?
Yes.
And one thing
Lee Strobel.
I thought was very interesting was he talked about Homer's Iliad
Mhm.
and the manuscripts of Homer's Iliad only being about 300,
Yes.
and
No one questions Homer. Yeah, there's so much scholarship about Homer, it could, fill an ocean. And yet, nobody questions that. So, but people do question the Bible. Double standard. Okay. So let's talk about the Codex Sinaiticus. Codex Sinaiticus up there, that is a picture of it. It dates from the mid-4th century. It contains the oldest complete Greek New Testament. It also has the Old Testament in the form of the Septuagint, and we are probably not going to get to the Septuagint today, but that's next on the agenda. It was discovered in 1844 by a rather colorful character named the Count Tischendorf. Count Tischendorf went around the Middle East in these exotic places looking for manuscripts and then sometimes selling them to the Tsar of Russia or the King of England and things like that. So this is a super important manuscript, but it was only found in 1844. So what does that mean? Any Bibles that were written before 1844 didn't have this. And this is the oldest complete manuscript of the New Testament. Okay, I was looking at the Codex Alexandrinus, and I forgot the Codex Vaticanus. That's also a 4th century manuscript of the Greek Bible. It has the majority of the Old Testament. It's in Koine. Actually, both of those are in Koine. Remember Koine. And the majority of the Greek New Testament discovered in the Vatican Library. They didn't even know it was there. Well, what do we have here? Oh, look, it's 4th century text of the New Testament. Wow, okay. And then let's look at the Codex Alexandrinus. That dates to the mid or very early 5th century. And it was in the library of the Patriarch of Alexandria, hence the name. But it has been documented since the 11th century. It contains the majority of the Greek Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, and it was donated to the King of England and is now preserved in the British Museum. So, and just, I don't know, that doesn't show up very well. I just wanted to show you that most of these really early manuscripts were written in a script that looks like this, and this should be bigger because you can't really see it, but this is called uncial. And this is all capitals, and all the words are run together. There's no breaks between the words. So that's just really typical of what these things look like. What's the time? Oh, 10:05. Well, let's take a quick jaunt at this. The first and earliest and most important named versions. Does anybody know what this might be? It's called the Septuagint. Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures written in Egypt and designated by the Roman numeral LXX and has a Latin name, Septuagint. What explains this monstrosity? Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures written in Egypt and designated with a Roman name. And it's super important, the Septuagint. Many Bibles are in some degree influenced by the Septuagint.
This is since Jesus quoted it.
Yeah. This is the Bible that most of the New Testament folks quoted. They didn't quote the Hebrew, they quoted the Greek. Even the Jewish writers quoted the Greek, Old Testament. Why? Well, the reason is that there were more Jews outside of Judea this was written in the second to third century. And at the time, there were more Jews outside of, can you hear me? More Jews outside of Judea than there were inside of it. Probably 2 million. Most of these Jews did not know Hebrew. This was written in Alexandria, Egypt. It probably had the largest Jewish expatriate population in the Mediterranean area. Alexandria was the second largest, was maybe the largest city in the world until Rome grew, and it was the second largest city in the Roman Empire. And there were a lot of Jewish people living there, and they didn't know Hebrew. So what is this? How did it get the name? What's going on with this? It was called the translation of the 70, and actually the legend says there were 72. There was a story recorded in a letter of a Greek writer called the Letter of Aristeas that the Hebrew Torah was translated into Greek at the request of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. Ptolemy II Philadelphus was the ruler of Egypt. He was a Greek. Why was he a Greek? Alexander the Great. One of his descendants was Cleopatra. Was she Egyptian? No, she was pure Greek. But they ruled in Egypt. And this was done sometime between 285 and 247 is when Ptolemy II Philadelphus reigned. So supposedly he wanted in his library the Jewish scriptures. And supposedly he sent to Israel, he asked the rabbis, they sent over 72 scholars, 6 scholars for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. They put them in a room and they each independently came up with the Septuagint in about, just a few days. That's probably legendary. But there was a Septuagint, it was written in Alexandria. It is super important because it is the Greek Old Testament that's quoted more often by New Testament writers. Not a lot of people spoke or read Hebrew. At the time of Jesus, there were not a lot of people speaking Hebrew. So Septuagint is still used in translation studies, and it is used by the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, today as the Old Testament. So pretty important. So Septuagint. All right. Any questions? Yes, Nina.
I had a question about the translation to the King James Bible. Did you say that the translators translated it in the classical language that they were familiar
Well,
with,
but
or did they translate it in the Koine?
they didn't know Koine, or they didn't know it very well. So when they translated, they were probably, it's probably a little distorted. It was probably a little distorted because they just didn't know the Koine Greek.
Were they attempting to translate it in Koine, or did they translate? What was that Koine?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex. Yeah, I can't answer that for sure. I just read a book on the King James translation. It was a lot of fun. We'll be talking about King James at some length here coming up. All I know is that, you know, when they were trained, what they did is they read in Greek and they read all these Greek classical books. So they knew Greek, but I don't think they knew the Koine Greek very well. And that presents a little bit of a problem because there is a significant difference. When there's two different languages, this happens often. It's called diglossia. There's a high and a low, like High German, Low German. There's in Arabic, as I understand it, you know, let's say the common people of Egypt today, you know, they speak Arabic. The street Arabic they speak, they can't understand classical Arabic. It's so different. And the Quran, their holy book, is written in classical Arabic. So guess what? They can't read it. Yeah. So there's a number of languages where this has been the case. There's a high and a low version, or a literary version, and you know, a more common version. So.
You're not sure if the King James version at the time was a literary version or not?
Oh yes, it's a literary. It was
It was a literary.
It was literary. We're going to go into King James at some depth. You know, the king issued this directive that thou shalt go create a Bible. What he wanted, it was a political move in some respects. I mean, James had inherited a throne that was a little unstable, and there had been a lot of discord. He wanted peace and unity in the kingdom. And the problem was, at the time of the King James Bible, you had the high church Anglicans that wanted to preserve sort of the Catholic forms and liturgy and vestments and stuff like that. And you had the Puritans, and the Puritans wanted to get rid of that stuff. Yeah, so James was looking for a Bible that was a sort of a compromise between those two. And the people that wrote that, remember, this is the time of Shakespeare and Marlowe. I mean, this is when really English is being created as a language, and these guys were absolutely brilliant. They did an incredible job. So I'm not advocating that anybody probably use the King James as their first version, but for poetry and majesty and richness of language, there's nothing like the King James. But the accuracy of it is not there, and it's just not there. They had like maybe, I'm going to guess here, you know, because I'd have to go back and research it, but let me say they had maybe 10 Greek manuscripts to work with, total. And when I say manuscripts, it can be anything from a fragment, like you saw that, to a complete, you know, a book of the Bible, a chapter, to a whole codex. So, you know, so we saw the whole codex, but some of it is just down to a fragment. Well, I think they only had like 10 manuscripts or something like that. I'll go back and check that. And how can you be accurate when today we have 6,000 manuscripts? I mean, they just can't. Is it really, really wrong? No, because again, most of the you know, like the discrepancies or problems don't affect biblical doctrine. There's minor little tweaky things. Yeah. So we're going to get into King James. Yeah, King James is great stuff. All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, go out and practice your Shema, and I'll test you on it when you get back. Next week. No, not next week. Not next week. We're not doing this next week. Not next week. We're not doing this next week. So.